Right, take it away, Joe.
Okay. Well, good morning to some and good afternoon to some others. So we'll start it that way. Appreciate everybody that is joining us today. It's another one of the webinars that we'll continue to put out there that you can learn from. uh, we again have Ellie and Maddie from Wingman that will be doing our presentation today. And it's really, geared to how do you sell more of this? What are some of the key things that you need to bring in or maybe gather for clients that might help in the selling process? So I also want to mention before I turn over to Ellie, the Cyber Center is going well. We're getting a lot of activity in there. It's picking up, and I hope you find it easy and a nice resource for you and your clients. Um, our goal is to really kind of help the sales process. We're going to be doing some other webinars coming up. We talked about doing one of basic, going really from the base ground up. Be a great way to learn and understand cyber from the beginning and how it plays into other policies. And that'll be a great one. And then we also talked about the putting in one on ransomware. So we'll have a series of these for you all. And with that said, Ellie and Maddie, thank you for being with us today, and take it away.
All right, thank you for that introduction, Joe. Hi, everyone. My name is Maddie. I will be co-hosting the webinar today with Ellie. Like Joe mentioned, today we're going to talk about how to sell more cyber. Some of you may be just getting started with us, so this will be a great way to learn about how to market cyber to your clients. So we'll chat about the top 5 tips to sealing the deal. Ellie, kick us off with tip number 1 of presenting the data.
Well, thank you, everybody. And thank you, Maddie. Today we want to talk about some of the things that are going to help you sell more policies. We've sort of broken it down into 5 areas. The first one is data. And by the way, guys, if at any point in time during any of this you have a question, there's a Q&A area. There's also a chat area. Use whichever one you're comfortable with. And Joe and Maddie will sort of pepper those into the rest of the conversation. So don't hesitate to use those. All right, let's talk about data. Data is a little bit complicated, and there's a reason particularly why data is so important when it comes to cyber. Most insurance that you guys sell fall into the category of needed or wanted. So contract requires the insurance, or your it's workers' compensation, so you have to have it, or your lease requires it, whatever it might be. Most of the insurance that everybody sells is understood and needed by a client for a particular reason. Cyber has 2 faults that make it more complicated and difficult to sell. The first is that it's not necessarily always wanted or needed by a client, or they don't know it is. And so that's difficult. And the second is that it's not going to be the largest line item on an invoice for all insurance products, which means you're not necessarily going to be able to devote an entire meeting to talking about cyber. So you have to have maximum impact with minimal effort. It's difficult. Your job is difficult to convince people who genuinely think they don't need cyber insurance, which is tough in this marketplace, because if they've gotten to this point and still don't understand their need for it, it's going to be hard to convince them, but they do actually need it. And there's a lot of reasons why. And data really helps you sell the case. Just as a few different kind of ways that we look at data, we look at, 7.5 out of 10 businesses have or will have experienced a cyber attack. These are not small numbers. These are terrible numbers. Sometimes it's worse to scare the bejesus out of your client, but it can be an effective tactic with many customers. The one that you'll see most frequently from cyber professionals, 60% of businesses that have a cyber breach and no cyber insurance go out of business within the first 6 months after a cyber incident. It's an older data that's actually pretty well. which is a little bit of a terrifying thought. So that would really give you an idea of some of the data that's out there. Look, there's data everywhere, and we're going to get into sort of where you can find it and how it'll make sense later on in this presentation. So on the one hand, you've got data in the sense of the terrifying broad scope of cyber breaches. On the other is the data around claims and how expensive they are. There are a lot of different ways that this can cost your customer a lot of money, from the direct financial losses to actually lost productivity losses in business income and things like that. Reputational harm is a big one, and even the physical device themselves. Before everybody jumped on today, Joe and I were talking about a coverage that's offered in good cyber policies called bricking. And that is when you get a virus on your computer or your tablet or your phone, and it essentially renders your device useless, thus turning it into a brick. General liability and property policies, standard package policies, and BOPs not provide coverage for electronic devices if the loss is the result of a cyber incident. But this is a property loss, and it is actually in a good cyber policy picked up on it. So those are a lot of things for you to account when it comes to all of this stuff.
All right, Ellie, let's talk a little bit about tip number 2 with case studies. You talked about, scaring people into wanting to buy cyber insurance. Let's talk a little bit about, how some scenarios could help you relate these cyber attacks to your insured.
Absolutely. I would say a lot of people call these case studies. I call it the art of storytelling. The first time I ever gave a presentation on cyber, I was standing in front of this huge group of people, and I told everybody the following story that I'm about to tell you. Imagine that you into your office one day and you sit down at your desk and you go to turn on your computer, and all that comes up is a black screen. And so you unplug it and plug it back in. You do all the Control-Alt-Delete nonsense that you've been taught to do by rude people everywhere. And still nothing happens until finally a little screen pops up that basically says, we've locked you out of your system. If you want to ever have access to your data again, you must wire us, you must send us X amount of Bitcoin to this account, yada, yada, yada. Now, up to this point, you really thought this was an isolated incident. You were just looking at your computer, but then you lift your head up and you hear some murmuring and you realize everybody in your office is looking at the same screen. Now, let's say you work for a multinational conglomerate and you then have to figure out how to communicate with people because the phones don't work, the computers don't work, nothing's working. And over time, you realize it's not just you, it's every single person in the entire company. There is not a single computer, entire network that will function. This is what happened to the company Maersk, the multi-billion-dollar shipping company, in July of 2017. The total claim cost was in the hundreds of millions of dollars. It shut down the port of Los Angeles for 4 days. And the people that I'm referencing had to figure out what items were on what international shipping containers by Twitter and Post-it notes. And I'm not exaggerating about any of this. Needless to say, they learned the hard way the importance of having cyber contingencies and cybersecurity controls in place. Why did I just tell you that whole story? The art of the storytelling when it comes to cyber is vital. Nobody thinks it applies to them until they realize that it applies to them. And unfortunately, what you don't want to happen is for them to figure that out because it actually happens to them. So how do you go about doing this? Storytelling can come in many forms. And I would say the two most effective are same industry and same location. But where do you find these stories? I'm going to now walk you through a few places that you can find great stories that you can then tell to your customers. Number one is on the screen in front of you. Anybody who works with Wingman has access to the Axis eRisk Hub. Net Diligence is a cybersecurity firm, and they've put together essentially this warehouse of resources for people who sell cyber insurance. It's everything from data and analytics to past claims, stories, and a database of past claims. If anybody's interested, here's how you access it. It's currently on the screen. We will send the slide out after this in case you want to get access to it as well. So needless to say, that's a great place to go to look for it. Our YouTube channel has a whole webinar on the Access eRisk. If you're interested, we can talk more about that separately because there's lots of places you can go, but this is a really good one.
Ellie, I just want to step in there too. We have a lot of these flyers that we have created, branded, with the Leavitt information on it. So if you need a particular topic, we're working on all of those. We're really building up quite a bit. I could try to share my screen real quick just to give you an example of what we do have available to you. I'll try to do it again if you don't mind if I share real quick, Ellie.
Can we maybe hold off till the end and then I'll pass it back to your screen so that you can then share everything that you've got available to everybody?
We can do that. Yep.
Perfect.
Yep. Go ahead.
So, okay, what's on the screen right now comes on with every single quote letter that we produce. And these are some very common real world actual claims examples that we have seen in our book of business. They cross many different industry segments. They cross many different types of claims, and they're all incredibly common, and the numbers are terrifying and staggering. So this is another way that you can do this, because if you're getting a quote from Joe or via us, then of course, these will be included with every single quote. Let me tell you about the best resource you've actually got. Google. Believe it or not, Google is fantastic about all of this stuff. We were playing around yesterday, Maddie and I. We typed in cyber breach manufacturing, California. We got 6 million results in less than a second, which is absolutely horrifying. And there's lots of different resources that are available to you. One of the best ones I have found is the second one down, which is the the third one down, which is the state of California's data breach database. Many states. Virginia has an excellent one that you must notify the state if data is ever stolen from you, and they keep very accurate and detailed records, public records of every single data breach that happens within the state. You can go in, you can find clients that are similar to your client. You can pull their examples and say, did you know your competitor had this happen to them? Let's get you insured. That's one of many ways to look at it. Another great thing about Google in particular is trade journals. So you might think, okay, you get Business Insurance Magazine, and every single Business Insurance Magazine has an article about cyber, but we're in the insurance space, it's a little bit different. Very common. It is very common in every kind of trade journal, from the Plumbers Association to the Realtors Association, to have articles about how cyber is impacting that particular business. And that's a reputable source for your client that they will recognize the name of and will feel confident that they're getting accurate information. You need only print that article off the internet and hand it to them with their claim and say, look, it's not just me, your trade association is all saying you need to buy this insurance coverage, and this is what I can offer you. So that's a really great way to do it. Utilize Google. You'll also see on here Arctic Wolf and Cloudian, and I'm about to show you more about that. These are cybersecurity firms. You don't need to buy their services to access parts of their website. In particular, the data aggregation of news articles that they all throw out into the world. This is just one example, a tiny screenshot of a much larger page of just the Cloudian attacks in March of this year. So you can really dig in on a timeline, on an industry, on a location, and really get to the what you think will convince your insureds that now's the time to really up their game when it comes to cyber liability insurance. Any questions so far?
Oh, Ellie, it does look like we have one question here. And I don't think it really has to do with the tips right now, but I think we can answer it all the same. The question is, does your policy cover if a vendor was hacked and then induced to send a wire on their instructions? So, coverage question.
Okay, that's a great question. And we should talk about that more in depth, because things like that are sort of very specific. There are coverages like for example, invoice manipulation that would cover if you sent an invoice to your vendor and in that process, it was intercepted and the payment instructions were changed. And so your vendor paid a bill thinking they were paying you, but they really weren't paying you. There is coverage for that. Similarly, if your vendor sends you an invoice and it was intercepted and you were fraudulently, and you paid, but it really wasn't you paying, but really you weren't paying your vendor, that's social engineering. You can also get coverage for that. It's all very specific. But if you have a specific coverage question or a specific scenario for a client, we'll send our contact information out at the end of this. Please feel free to email me and we can talk about it and make sure that your specific scenario would be something that is covered. Good question.
Yeah, thank you. Tip number 3, understanding the market. This one kind of goes hand in hand with tip number 1 and knowing the data. Ellie, talk a little bit about the most recent market changes that we've seen.
Yes, well, we have left the wild, wild west era of cyber liability insurance where anybody with a URL or even without get a cyber policy for their business for pennies. Sadly, those days are over. 2020 saw to that. On top of everything else 2020 threw at us. It was the nastiest in terms of cyber claims in particularly covered companies. So with all the work from home and everything else, insurance companies got absolutely battered in the loss ratio standpoint, and everybody has tightened up their underwriting requirements. So what does that mean for you as you're selling the insurance? If your client is a giant data mining company, the likelihood, but they only make $2 million a year, they're not getting 10 million limits anymore. We need to see revenues at or exceeding limits. It's one of those things. Also, when we used to ask no underwriting questions and had no cyber requirements for businesses, every company across the marketplace has minimum standards now. For example, multi-factor authentication on remote access and email, having a backup, things like that. Those are the basic things now that are required for anybody to get insurance. So where once you could bring the quote with you to the meeting and it was sort of bindable, that's not really the case anymore. We need to make sure that every business has some minimum standards. So insurance companies are doing a few things to help with that. Number one, they're giving companies a little leeway on their renewal extensions and the like to ensure that companies that aren't in compliance with these new requirements have the time, the tools, and everything else to get up to snuff. The other thing that they're trying to do is limit the difficult classes that they were writing willy-nilly. We still write a ton of healthcare, but we're seeing across the marketplace a ton of insurance carriers that aren't even writing it at all because they got hit so hard in 2020. We're seeing that with a lot of different industries. Oil and gas is a new one that's been an interesting problem. Energy in general has been a really tough one. So where it used to be, if you weren't a credit card processor, you could pretty much get insurance. That's really not the case anymore. You need to have minimum standards. They really look closely at financial institutions and at healthcare companies. And so if you're working with any of these kinds of higher risk technology, data, anything like that, companies, start your renewal process early when it comes to cyber. Give Joe and anybody else that you're working with time to both tell you what this insured will need to get insurance and give them the time to actually implement them. So it's really a lot more about timing. It gives you a great point of touch point with your insurer at the 120-day mark prior to a renewal to really get the ball rolling and devote some actual time to cyber. So I would really encourage everybody to look long at these new requirements and bigger applications, everything else, and give yourself some extra time to get it done, especially with the new 1/1s that are coming up. It's going to be a tough market. If you know you've got some tough 1/1s coming up, let's start now. Let's talk now and really talk about what they are going to need to have in place before they're going to be able to get insurance.
Great. Tip number 4 is understanding the coverages. I'm sure everyone has plenty of questions about, okay, what is covered? Ellie, let's go through a little bit of the differences between what's covered on one of those bolt-on cyber policies to a BOP versus what is more covered on a monoline cyber policy?
Great. This is really one of my bigger sticking points. You're going to hear, and some of the most common objections we have to an actual standalone cyber policy is one of the following. Either A, I'm indemnified because my credit card processor or my internet service provider or my insert name of cybersecurity firm that is absolutely not doing this tells me I don't need cyber insurance. That's complete BS. I think you guys all know that. It's hard to combat that, though, if you don't really understand why they think that. So let's dig into that a little bit. Coverages on a cyber policy cover a lot more than just credit card chargebacks. They're going to cover a litany of different things. Third-party claims, like getting sued by your customers for leaking their data. First-party claims, like the bricking that we talked about earlier, or ransomware payment, like we see every day. They're also going to cover business interruption and income losses and reputational harm, and on and on and on the list goes. So the best way that you can combat those kind of we are told we don't need it is A, if it's an IT professional telling you this, they don't understand how much is actually covered on a cyber policy aside from just a couple of things that IT person is doing. And if it's internet service provider contract or whatever contract, indemnity is one thing. It's not very much foolproof. I always like to use the example of if Google goes down and they have thousands of claims because of lost income, where do you think your client's going to rank in the importance of the people that are going to be suing Google to recover money? That's one of those ways I like to think about it. The other common objection that we get when it comes to coverages is, oh, I spent $300 on that, on an endorsement to my BOP policy. I'm covered. Here's the problem with those BOP add-ons. And I'm not saying all of them are garbage, but most of them are pretty garbage. They top out at between 500 and 50,000 and 100,000 in what they call breach notification expenses. That's those costs that you incur to actually notify customers there's been a breach, and mitigate those notification costs, like credit monitoring and things like that. What they're not covering is actually more important than what they are. If there's any ransomware coverage at all, it's like $10,000, $40,000, useless when the average ransomware claim is $100 and something thousand. They're rarely, if ever, covering anything crime related, like social engineering or invoice manipulation. They're never covering business interruption, first or third party, which are really some biggest claim drivers. They're not covering property like bricking. They're not covering, and the list goes on and on and on and on of the things that they're not covering. So while you might get a little bit of limit for that to notify your customers, that's not enough. And we'll talk about that more in a second. It's just not enough to actually mitigate any actual claim that might come in. Questions on this one?
Ellie, we do have a quick question about bricking, and Joe answered it, but do you mind just, sharing a quick definition again?
Absolutely. So bricking is when you get a virus or malware on your device, your computer, your laptop, your tablet, your phone, and the result of that is that it makes your device unusable, meaning you have to buy a new one. And when that happens, that basically turns your device into a brick because it can be used as nothing other than a paperweight at that point. So this is the property coverage that would pay to replace that actual device. And it works on servers, it works on, again, your desktop computer, and it happens fairly frequently. And good policies will cover $250,000 of this kind of coverage to replace the actual devices.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
All right, so then we talk more about why the BOP add-on in particular and the limited sort of protections by internet service providers, et cetera, it doesn't make a big deal. Let's talk about the cost of a ransomware attack. Ransomware, by the way, 6 times out of 10 is what your customer is going to be hit with. So we're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars in Bitcoin. We're going to get to why that is substantively ridiculous in a second, not the money, the Bitcoin. Let's break down what the costs and if these coverages are actually included in a BOP add-on. Number one, we're talking to lawyers. Why are we talking to lawyers? Do we need to disclose to the state? Do we need to disclose to customers? Are we legally allowed to pay these people, or are they on some sort of government watch list? That's $500 an hour, and it's not going to be 1 hour. IT forensics, we'll jump to the next one. IT forensics, that's how did this get on our system? How do I get this off of my system? Do I have a usable backup? Can we get it up and running? And if so, let's do that. That's up to $500 an hour as well. Crisis management is what we call it. That's that notifying your customers and the state when necessary. Public relations, so right now we've only gotten one of the things that has actually been covered by the BOP, and that's that crisis management. Public relations, not covered. Reputational harm, again, not covered. In order to figure out if you've had a reputational harm claim or a business interruption claim, you need to hire forensic accountants. They're going to look through your books and see how much business you lost, how long you were down, how much money you could have made during that period of time. That's $500 an hour. All of these things are covered by a good cyber policy. Not at all covered by a BOP add-on, and we don't even get to sort of some of the additional services cyber policy will. So I hope it gives you a little bit of just the paying the ransom, which also, by the way, wouldn't have been completely covered by a BOP add-on. It's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to actual cyber claims.
All right, what a perfect explanation of ransomware and why you need that monoline cyber policy. Let's talk about tip number 5. Ellie, talk about what a declination letter is and how to use it.
Yeah, so there's very few tactics we've seen be as successful in actually bullying your clients into doing what's best for them than the declination letter. You often, I'm sure, use them for things like EPLI coverage, but it's important to use them for cyber as well. Having a letter that reiterates all of the things that we just said, some statistics, a story or two, and then require them, if they opt not to purchase it, to sign away their ability to sue you later when they have a cyber incident is a very important tool, both for sales and, of course, to protect your agency's E&O. So we have a form of these. Joe has it, or if you want to email us, we'll give you our contact information. We'll send it to you directly. It's unbraided. You add your agency's information to it, and it allows you to add it to every single underwriting file if, God forbid, one of your clients simply refuses to purchase the cyber insurance that they need, or that they're purchasing under insurance, where you've told them you really need a standalone policy with at least $1 million limit, which is true. But they only want that BOP add-on, make them sign it so that they say they understand that this is going against insurance advice. It's really one of the more effective tactics that we've seen, both to protect yourself and your customer.
Yeah, Ellie, we have several different versions available, all branded with Leavitt. So just send me email if you need an example, and I'll get it out to you.
Yeah, that's great, Joe. It's a really good tool to include with your marketing materials for sure.
Great. And Ellie, we have a bonus tip here. A cyber policy is more than protection. Tell us a little bit about some other resources that are included in a cyber policy that maybe you're not necessarily thinking about.
Absolutely. I sort of alluded to this earlier when we were talking about the absurdity of Bitcoin. But let's go back to our Maersk example, and you're sitting there and it tells you owe X number of Bitcoin to some unknown entity. Do you know how to get your hands on Bitcoin? Do you know how to transfer Bitcoin? Do you know how to properly account for that? Do you know if you're going to even be able to get your system back up and running with an encryption key? Do you even know who to call to get that stuff straight? And that's the beauty of a good cyber policy. It comes with a cadre of pre-approved vendors who do nothing but this all day long. But also, in particular, our policy comes with a breach response coordinator, or we call them breach coaches. And it's an attorney who knows your policy, knows what resources are available to you, and acts as a quarterback to help you deploy those resources as effectively as possible. So in the event of a breach, we say, don't call the claims people first, call the breach coach first, get everything up and running, and then handle it with the claims department, because undoubtedly, the most complicated and hard thing for an insured, they're going worst experience probably of their business lives, and they need to know that something's in there and that all of this isn't going to in their face. And that's the great thing of a breach coach. Cyber policies also come with a lot of others. If somebody wants to, God forbid, get proactive about their cybersecurity, we have employee training modules that are free to all policyholders, that if they want to take advantage of them, they can for no additional cost. It's absolutely fantastic. And those are just, again, the tip of the iceberg of things that you can do with cyber policy that aren't coming with your BOP add-ons or your internet service provider. So think about that a little bit. We like to say a good cyber policy is like having cybersecurity experts on retainer. And it really is. You don't need to think about it. That's not your job. You're insured to think about it. That's not their job. To the experts, and you'll know that if the worst happens, then there's somebody there to protect you. And we're firm believers in that. Any questions on that? Questions. We've covered a lot today. I just want to reiterate sort of a few things. I realize that for most of you, selling $1,500 to $2,000 cyber policy isn't the highlight of your day, but it does become an imperative for insurance professionals to really highlight cyber, put it front and center because of how important it is for the longevity of your insured's businesses. I also understand that the terms that are used, the stories are complicated. It's not getting any easier. It's only getting harder. That's why it's really important for entities like Joe and Contact to exist. This is all they do. They're fantastic at it, and they can act as your resource center when these questions arise. And of course, we're there to back them up. So when you're concerned about insured, are they underinsured? Do they have the coverage that they need? I can't convince them to actually buy the darn thing. Utilize our talents. Let us help you get the sale. Let us help you better insure your customers. That's what really all of this is about. So any other questions before we call it a day?
I have a few comments, Ellie. Yeah.
Go for it.
Thanks, Maddie and Ellie, for everything you've done for this and the Leavitt folks. Remember, we're trying to give you all the tools to make it easy and to make it ability to go into a client and feel comfortable about discussing it. There's a lot of, we have a lot of flyers that we've converted into the Leavitt look with the colors and everything. Some of those are on our Cyber Center. Some of them, I have a folder for them if you need anything. The one thing that Wingman had that they put together was just a easy walkthrough that you can give to your clients about multi-factor authentication and how do you do it and the steps for Microsoft Office 365, I think. Anyway, there's some great tools available. Ask. I'm always available to respond to you and be glad to help in any way I can. So Austin had a question about average cost per person for notification when a breach occurs. Ellie, do you want to talk that?
Absolutely. Austin, that's a really great question. And the answer is fascinating. It 100% depends on two things. Do you have insurance or don't you? And what kind of data is it? If you have insurance, obviously the insurance companies cut a deal, so it's a lot cheaper. If you're trying to do this on your or customer doesn't have a cyber insurance policy, for basic information like email address and name, we're looking at $99 a person to set up a website, notify the state, yada, yada, yada for each individual. For health information, for credit card information, that can go up to $500 a person. So think about how quickly you're exhausting just that one little limit. But I do want to stress one other thing when it comes to that, and it is Claims day in the cyber world are less about notification, ironically, than they are about some of those first party costs. The costs that really add up are the IT forensics people, the forensic accountants, the data people, the list goes on and on and on, the business interruption. While those costs are very expensive, they are not actually the highest ticket items on a cyber claim today, and it's just fascinating. I also just got another question about social engineering limits. They vary by policy. Ours is 250,000, and you'll be hard pressed to find a company that will offer more than 250,000 in social engineering limits. If your insured needs more for whatever reason, look to a crime policy, a standalone crime policy where you can pick up that and a lot more for full limits. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, that's a thank you, Ellie. That's a great one to discuss. There's a lot of different policies, and just to remind everybody, we've gone through different programs, different policies to kind of compare and contrast between the two. And 250,000 is a generous limit for that.
Well, it's been a real pleasure. There was another question about bricking that I just answered quickly in the chat, which was, do all policies cover it? The answer is no. And interestingly, the biggest wrinkles we've seen lately is with all the work from home, most insurance policies carved back employee devices. Ours did not. Ours offers employee-owned device coverage like as part of the policy. But a lot of them, even if they might have covered like a server in the office, they weren't going to cover all of the individual devices that are being used at home. So it's a complex thing. It's all very specific to each scenario. But the beauty is you guys are ahead of the curve when it comes to even asking these questions. So it's a real pleasure as always.
Hey, Ellie, there's one more question about, is there a website where you can find exactly what state requires should a breach happen? I know.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. This brings up two really good points that we can close out with. The first is the federal government has an excellent site. I will send the link to Joe, but CISA just came out with a new ransomware hub, I think is what they're calling it, which is a terrible name for what it is, but it's basically a resource center for planning and pre and post breach information if you have a ransomware attack, and best practices. Every single state has a cybersecurity office that keeps their rules, but big law firms have them aggregated. So if you Google state breach notification laws, I think Alston Bird or one of the other big ones has like a very detailed and up-to-date database of each state's requirement and a redirect to that state's website with all of the detailed information. So absolutely, you can find that pretty easily. It's good to have on hand unless you live in a place like West Virginia, I think, like doesn't care.
Oh, did one more question just pop up, or is that all?
One more did. Austin, you got to talk one-on-one because you're way ahead of the curve here. He wants to know if insurance companies are asking insureds to use what's called the sandbox method, which is essentially a test environment that you put segregated, that you are used to sort of segregate and separate any programs or files or data. That's a complexity issue. I hate to say yes or no because it very much depends on the size of the risk and the profile of the risk. The typical customer that you guys are going to be dealing with are not going to know what a sandbox is, nor are they ever going to use it. And insurance companies know and understand that. Right now, we're just excited if they turn on MFA for Microsoft 365, which we really hope that they do because they're not getting insurance otherwise. But as the cyber claims get more developed, we're seeing some additional trends in requirements. For example, if you use a remote desktop protocol, there are other security measures that need to be in place, things like that. But along with that are new innovations on the technology side on the insurance space. instead of having to ask your clients if they're using, we're able to utilize some technology and find out if they're using that and help them close those gaps if needed, instead of putting it all on a business owner to know what they do and do not have in a minutia, from the minutia standpoint of a cybersecurity space. But Austin, if you want to talk one-on-one, I'm Leellie at wingmanins.com, and we can dig into the nitty gritty. But I appreciate all those questions today. They've been fantastic. And I don't know if you noticed, we're doing a roadmap walkthrough of our quote letter in the next month or so. We're also going to be doing some Leavitt specials, as we're calling the building of a cybersecurity toolkit, where we're going to start from the ground and keep adding more and more knowledge for people as they want or need it. That will help anybody with new employees or new to cyber employees. So we hope this is of value. Any feedback is greatly appreciated for me and for Joe. So bring it on.
Yeah, it's awesome. Thank you so much, Ellie. Ellie is fantastic. Maddie's fantastic. They do a great job. And I hope that helps everybody. We're here to help you sell more. So if you have those questions or need some help, we're here. And with that, I think we're done. Or do we have anything else?
Thank you, everybody. Happy Tuesday. Bye, Joe. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye. We'll see you, everybody.